Imagine pulling up to your own mansion after a long day, only to be told you don't belong there. That's exactly what happened to Marcus Williams, a self-made tech CEO, on a sunny Friday afternoon. As his sleek black Tesla rolled up to the ornate gates of his Beverly Hills estate, Marcus was met not with a warm welcome, but with suspicion. The new security guard, clipboard in hand, eyed Marcus through the tinted window. "Sorry, sir, this is private property. I can't let you in," he said, his tone firm and dismissive. Marcus, dressed in a casual hoodie and jeans, tried to explain. "I live here. This is my house." But the guard shook his head, insisting, "I need to see some ID. And even then, I'll have to call the owner." Marcus couldn't believe it. He had built his company from scratch, bought this mansion with his hard-earned money, and yet, here he was, being treated like an intruder at his own home. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his cool. He reached into his glove compartment and pulled out his driver's license, handing it to the guard through the window. The guard barely glanced at it, his eyes darting between Marcus and the address on the card. "I still need to call the owner," he repeated, as if Marcus's very presence was a threat. Marcus felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He had dealt with skepticism before. At board meetings, in business negotiations, even at luxury car dealerships. But this was different. This was his sanctuary, the place he'd worked so hard to call home. And now, a stranger was questioning his right to be there. All because he didn't fit the guard's idea of what a mansion owner should look like. As the guard radioed his supervisor, Marcus noticed a few neighbors slowing their cars as they drove by, curious about the commotion at the usually quiet gates. He could feel their eyes on him, wondering what was going on. The minutes dragged on, each one making Marcus feel smaller and more humiliated. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the head of security arrived. He was an older man with a stern face and a no-nonsense attitude. He looked Marcus up and down, then turned to the guard. "What's the problem here?" he asked. The guard explained the situation, emphasizing that Marcus didn't look like the owner, and that he was just following protocol. The head of security nodded, then turned to Marcus. "We have strict rules, sir. We can't just let anyone in, even if they say they live here. I hope you understand." Marcus stared at him, incredulous. "I do understand the need for security," he said, his voice steady but cold. "But I also expect to be treated with respect in my own home. I've lived here for years. My name is on the deed. I shouldn't have to prove myself every time I come home." The head of security shrugged, as if to say there was nothing he could do. "It's just our policy," he said. "We have to be careful." At that moment, Marcus's phone buzzed. It was his wife, who had been watching the security cameras from inside the house. "What's going on out there?" she asked, concern in her voice. Marcus explained, and she immediately came to the gate, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. When she arrived, the guards finally relented, opening the gate and allowing Marcus to drive through. But the damage was done. Marcus felt a deep sense of violation, as if a line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. That night, Marcus sat in his home office, replaying the incident over and over in his mind. He thought about all the times he'd been underestimated, all the times people had assumed he couldn't possibly be the boss. He thought about his children and what kind of world he wanted them to grow up in, a world where they would be judged by their character, not by the color of their skin or the clothes they wore. He knew he had to take action. He couldn't let this slide, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. He decided to call the security company the next morning, determined to make it clear that respect and dignity were non-negotiable in his home. As he closed his laptop and prepared for bed, Marcus made a silent promise to himself. He would never let anyone make him feel like a stranger in his own home again. And he would do everything in his power to make sure no one else had to either. Marcus tried to keep his cool. He handed over his driver's license, which clearly showed his name and address. But the guard barely glanced at it before radioing his supervisor. "I have a man here claiming to be the owner," he said, his voice laced with doubt. "He doesn't look like he belongs." As Marcus sat in his car, the engine quietly humming, he could feel the weight of the guard's suspicion pressing down on him. The guard's words echoed in his mind, each syllable stinging more than the last. He doesn't look like he belongs. Marcus had heard those words or words like them too many times in his life. But never here, never at the gates of the home he had worked so hard to earn. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. Marcus glanced in his rearview mirror and noticed a few of his neighbors slowing their cars as they passed by, their eyes lingering on the scene unfolding at the gate. Some looked curious, others concerned, but none stopped to help. Marcus felt exposed, as if he were on display for the whole neighborhood to see. He could almost hear the unspoken questions. Who is that? What's going on? Why is he being stopped? Inside the car, Marcus's mind raced. He thought about all the times he'd been underestimated, all the times people had assumed he couldn't possibly be the boss. He remembered the early days of his career, when he'd walk into meetings and people would mistake him for an assistant or a delivery man. He remembered the looks of surprise when he introduced himself as the CEO, the awkward apologies, the forced smiles. But this was different. This was his sanctuary, his safe space, the place where he was supposed to feel most at home. He tried to steady his breathing, reminding himself that he had nothing to prove. He was the owner. His name was on the deed. He had every right to be here. But the humiliation was hard to shake. He wondered if the guard would have reacted the same way if he looked different, if he wore a suit instead of a hoodie, if his skin was a different color. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the head of security arrived. He was a tall, imposing man with a stern expression and a clipboard of his own. He walked up to Marcus's car, glanced at the guard and then at Marcus. There was no apology in his eyes, no hint of understanding. Instead, he seemed almost annoyed by the inconvenience. "We have strict protocols, sir. You should understand," the head of security said, his tone bordering on accusatory. He didn't ask Marcus for any more identification. He didn't offer an apology for the delay or the suspicion. He simply stood there, arms crossed, as if daring Marcus to challenge him. Marcus realized in that moment that this wasn't just about security. It was about perception, about bias, about who people expect to see living in a mansion like his. The guard and his supervisor hadn't seen a successful CEO returning home after a long day. They had seen someone who didn't fit their idea of what a homeowner should look like. And that was enough for them to treat him like a stranger or worse, a potential threat. The realization stung. Marcus had always known that bias existed, that people made snap judgments based on appearance. But he had hoped that, at least in his own home, he would be safe from that kind of scrutiny. He had hoped that his success, his hard work, would be enough to earn him the benefit of the doubt. But standing there at the gate, with 2 security guards questioning his right to be there, he felt more like an outsider than ever. As the head of security finally waved him through, Marcus drove up the long driveway to his house, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. He could feel the anger simmering beneath the surface, mingling with the hurt and the humiliation. He knew he would have to address this not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. That night, as he sat in his living room, Marcus replayed the incident in his mind. He thought about his children, about the example he wanted to set for them. He thought about his employees, many of whom looked like him, and the message this incident sent. He knew he couldn't let it go. He would have to take action to make it clear that respect and dignity were not optional, not negotiable. And as he made that decision, Marcus felt a sense of resolve settle over him. He might have been made to feel like an outsider at his own gate, but he would make sure that no one else ever had to feel that way again. As the standoff continued, Marcus's phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He glanced down and saw his wife's name flashing on the screen. She had been watching the security cameras from inside the house, and her voice was tight with concern when he answered. "What's going on out there?" she asked, her words quick and anxious. Marcus tried to keep his voice steady as he explained the situation, but he could hear the frustration creeping in. "They won't let me in," he said quietly. "They don't believe I live here." There was a pause on the other end, and then his wife's tone changed. "I'm coming down," she said, her anger barely contained. Within minutes she appeared at the gate, her face set in a look Marcus knew all too well, the look she wore when she was ready to fight for her family. She marched up to the guards, her voice sharp and unwavering. "This is my husband. This is our home. Open the gate. Now." The guards exchanged nervous glances, suddenly unsure of themselves. The head of security, who had been so firm just moments before, seemed to shrink under her glare. Without another word, he signaled to the guard at the booth, who pressed the button to open the heavy iron gates. The barrier that had kept Marcus out for so long finally slid aside, but the sense of exclusion lingered in the air. Marcus drove through, his wife walking beside the car, her arm protectively on the hood as if daring anyone to stop them again. As he parked in the driveway, Marcus felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. He stepped out of the car, and his wife immediately wrapped him in a hug. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You shouldn't have to go through this. Not here. Not ever." Inside the house, the familiar surroundings felt different. The walls that had once offered comfort now seemed to echo with the memory of what had just happened. Marcus sat down in the living room, his mind racing. He thought about his employees, many of whom looked like him, many of whom had probably faced similar moments of doubt and suspicion in their own lives. He thought about his children, who would one day inherit not just his home, but the world that had treated him this way. He wondered what message this incident sent, not just to him but to anyone who looked like him. Was success ever enough? Would there always be someone ready to question his place, no matter how hard he worked or how much he achieved? The question swirled in his mind, heavy and unanswerable. That night Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay awake, replaying the scene over and over in his head. The guard's suspicious eyes, the dismissive tone, the way his neighbors had watched but said nothing. He thought about the countless times he'd been underestimated, the times he'd had to prove himself twice over just to be seen as equal. But this was different. This was his home. The one place he should have been safe from judgment and doubt. He got up and walked through the darkened halls of his mansion, the silence pressing in on him. He paused in front of the window, looking out at the gate that had become a symbol of something much bigger than a simple misunderstanding. It was a reminder of the barriers that still existed, even for someone who had achieved so much. Marcus knew he had to take action, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. He thought about the young people who looked up to him, who saw his success as proof that they, too, could make it. What would they think if they knew that even he wasn't immune to this kind of treatment? He made a decision then and there. He would not let this incident pass quietly. He would speak up, not just to the security company but to his community, his employees, and anyone who would listen. He would use his platform to shine a light on the subtle ways people were excluded, even in places they should have felt most at home. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, Marcus felt a sense of resolve settle over him. He couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future. He would make sure that his home was a place of welcome and respect, not just for himself, but for everyone who walked through its doors. And he would do everything in his power to ensure that no one else ever had to feel like a stranger in their own home. The next morning, Marcus woke up with a sense of determination. The events of the previous day still weighed heavily on his mind, but he knew he couldn't let them slide. He had always believed in addressing problems head-on, and this situation was no different. As he sipped his coffee, he drafted an email to the security company, requesting an urgent meeting with their management team. He wanted answers, and more importantly, he wanted change. By mid-morning, Marcus was seated in his home office, a large window behind him letting in the soft California sunlight. Across from him on a video call were 3 representatives from the security company: the regional manager, the operations director, and the head of client relations. Their faces were tense, their smiles forced. They knew something serious had happened. Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. He recounted the entire incident in detail, his voice calm but firm. He described how the guard had doubted his identity, how the head of security had doubled down instead of apologizing, and how the entire ordeal had left him feeling like a stranger in his own home. He didn't sugarcoat his words. "I was treated with suspicion and disrespect at my own front gate," he said. "Not because of any real security concern, but because of how I looked." The company's representatives listened, nodding along, occasionally interjecting with apologies. "We're so sorry, Mr. Williams," the regional manager said. "This is not how we train our staff. There must have been a miscommunication. The guard was new, and perhaps he didn't recognize you yet." Marcus shook his head. This wasn't about training or miscommunication. This was about perception. About bias. I handed over my ID, which clearly showed my name and address. That should have been enough. But it wasn't. The operations director tried to offer another explanation. We've had a lot of turnover recently, and sometimes new staff can be overly cautious. We'll make sure to retrain everyone and review our protocols. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with excuses. He leaned forward, looking directly into the camera. "Let me ask you something," he said, his tone measured but intense. "If I looked different, if I was older or white or dressed in a suit, do you think this would have happened? Would your guard have doubted me? Would your head of security have treated me the same way?" The question hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. The three representatives glanced at each other, but no one spoke. The silence was telling. Marcus could see the discomfort on their faces, the way they avoided his gaze. He knew they didn't have a good answer because deep down they knew the truth. After a long pause, the head of client relations finally spoke. "Mr. Williams, we are truly sorry for what happened. We value your business and your trust. Please let us make this right. We can assign a new team, one with more experience. We'll provide additional training on diversity and sensitivity. Whatever you need, we'll do it." But Marcus had already made up his mind. He had given this company his trust, and they had failed him in the most basic way. He needed to send a clear message, not just to them but to anyone who might think it was acceptable to treat him or anyone else with such disrespect. "Effective immediately, I'm terminating your contract," Marcus said, his voice unwavering. "I want your entire team off my property by noon today. I'll be hiring a new security company. One that understands the importance of respect, not just for me, but for my family and my guests. I won't tolerate anything less." The security company's representatives tried to negotiate. They offered discounts, promised to send their best staff, even suggested a personal apology from the CEO. But Marcus stood firm. "This isn't about money or apologies. It's about principle. I need to know that the people protecting my home see me as the owner, not as a suspect." By noon, the security team had packed up and left. Marcus watched from his window as the last guard drove away, feeling a sense of relief and empowerment. He knew he had done the right thing, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong in a place they had every right to call home. That afternoon, Marcus began interviewing new security companies, making it clear from the start what his expectations were. He wanted a team that valued diversity, that understood the importance of treating every resident and guest with dignity. He was determined to turn a moment of humiliation into a catalyst for change, both in his own life and, hopefully, in the wider community. News of the incident at Marcus's mansion spread quickly, first among his close friends, then throughout his professional network, and soon across social media platforms. It started with a few texts and calls from people who had heard about the confrontation at his gate, but within hours the story was being discussed in group chats, on Twitter, and even in local news forums. People were shocked that someone as accomplished and respected as Marcus Williams could be treated with such suspicion at his own home. Many praised him for standing up for himself, while others began sharing their own stories of being profiled or disrespected in places where they should have felt safe. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. Marcus received messages from colleagues, friends, and even strangers who thanked him for speaking out. Some told him about similar experiences they'd had, being questioned in their own neighborhoods, doubted in their workplaces, or made to feel like outsiders in spaces they had every right to occupy. The more Marcus read, the more he realized that his story was not unique. It was part of a much larger pattern, one that needed to be addressed. Rather than let the incident fade into the background, Marcus decided to use his platform to turn it into a teachable moment. He sat down in his home office, turned on his camera, and recorded a video for his company's YouTube channel. In the video, he spoke candidly about what had happened at his gate, describing the feelings of anger, humiliation, and disbelief that had washed over him. He explained why he had chosen to fire the security company, and what he hoped others would take away from his experience. "It's not just about me," Marcus said, looking directly into the camera. "It's about making sure everyone is treated with dignity, no matter where they come from or what they look like. We all deserve to feel safe and respected in our own homes." We all deserve to be seen for who we are, not just for how we appear. The video quickly went viral, racking up thousands of views and sparking conversations in the comments section. People from all walks of life chimed in, sharing their own stories and expressing their support. Some thanked Marcus for his courage, while others admitted that they had never considered how common these experiences were for people of color and other marginalized groups. The video became a catalyst for dialogue, both within Marcus's company and in the wider community. But Marcus didn't stop there. He knew that real change required more than just words. He took concrete steps to ensure that what had happened to him would not happen to anyone else on his property. He hired a new security team, making it clear from the outset that respect, diversity, and sensitivity were non-negotiable values. The new team underwent comprehensive diversity and sensitivity training, learning not just about protocols and procedures, but about the importance of treating every resident and guest with dignity. Marcus also wanted to make a difference beyond his own gates. He started a scholarship fund for young people of color interested in pursuing careers in security and law enforcement. His goal was to help change the industry from the inside out, to create a new generation of professionals who understood the importance of empathy, fairness, and respect. The scholarship program quickly gained traction, attracting support from other business leaders and community organizations who shared Marcus's vision. As the weeks went by, Marcus's story became a symbol of resilience and self-respect. He had taken a moment of humiliation and turned it into a powerful lesson for his community and beyond. People began to see him not just as a successful CEO, but as a leader who was willing to stand up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable or difficult. Every time Marcus drove through his mansion gates after that, he did so with his head held high. The memory of that day still lingered, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it served as a reminder of the difference one person could make by refusing to accept disrespect and by demanding better, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told, "You don't belong here." Through his actions, Marcus inspired others to speak up, to challenge bias, and to create spaces where everyone could feel safe and valued. His story was no longer just about a confrontation at a gate. It was about the power of dignity, the importance of community, and the belief that everyone deserves to belong. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a powerful story like this one. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters.